This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopia says it will punish anyone who breaks the law after it detains UN staff for unspecified offenses. Sudan's army chief swears himself in as the leader of a new transitional council. And APEC leaders pledge to tackle economic recovery, COVID-19, and climate. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Investors in South Africa welcome the first budget presided over by Finance Minister Gordon Gwana. And a look at Egypt's e-finance initial public offer that was more than 60 times oversubscribed. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us for this hour. Let's begin in Ethiopia, where the country says it will punish United Nations or African Union staff who break the law. The Foreign Ministry said on Thursday everyone will be held accountable after the arrest of several aid workers. The UN says at least 9 of its staff members and dozens of truck drivers have been detained without cause. They have been delivering aid to parts of Ethiopia affected by fighting between the government and forces from Tigray. The government of Ethiopia says there is no plan for a ceasefire as they do not negotiate with insurgents. This follows former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo's call at the AU Peace and Security Council meeting to have the federal government and TPLF withdraw their troops from held areas. In an exclusive interview, CGTN's correspondent Gurum Chala spoke to Beline Seyum, the press secretary of Ethiopia's prime minister, on the matter. Let's take a listen.
Equalizing insurgency, equalizing an insurgent group and a terrorist organization is a first mistake that a lot of international groups are making. So that needs to be, first of all, checked. When the Ethiopian government took a unilateral ceasefire to support its own people within the Tigray region, and this was the end of June 2021, what we saw TPLF doing is rather than taking that as an olive branch, they described it as a sick joke and rather mobilized their entire community and the entire machinations within the Tigray region to attack the Afar region and to attack the Amhara region, to pillage communities, to destroy properties, public and private properties, to kill innocent civilians, raping women and children, as recent reports are also unfolding. So the responsibility of the federal government is to ensure that this needs to cease, and hence why, as the one with the legitimate power and the legitimate authority that is overlooking peace and security within the entire country, the federal government has got the responsibility to say that they need to be removed outside of these regions.
Is there a threat for these countries or nations to ask their citizens to remove themselves out of the city?
Like you said, I mean, countries have got their own processes of how they go about this, and they are, justified in their own right to do what they will with their citizens. But the unintended consequence of publicizing such kind of things is creating hysteria around the country, about the country to an international community, based on, issues that are not really, or threats that are not really far and near. It's been almost 2 weeks, I think, since the hysteria around Addis being under siege emerged, and yet we have seen that, Addis Ababans are going about their daily lives peacefully. Not only Addis Ababa, but also the communities within the vicinity of Addis Ababa are also going about. So for an altercation that had happened, about 380 or 400 kilometers away, and for a battle, because, part of this war for the past year, there's so many battles that are happening. There are pushes, there are advances, there's defense, and there's offense. So for a particular, offense that may have been done by the TPLF, the way that they painted it, utilizing the propaganda machines, including within the international media, painted a really, incorrect picture of what's happening on the ground. So yes, they're moving some of their citizens, but I think there's also some citizens who are actively engaged and knowing how to differentiate between the wheat and the chaff in terms of the information.
Meanwhile, in Sudan, Khartoum State announced it will close off bridges across the River Nile ahead of Saturday's planned protest, and that's according to Sudan TV. Pro-democracy supporters have called for mass demonstrations to decry last month's military takeover and the appointment of a new ruling council by the army chief who led the takeover. General Abdel Fattah el-Burhan on Thursday swore himself in as leader of that council.
No, we do not accept this. We want a civilian rule. We want a legislative council to set rules and rule everyone equally. Formation of the Sovereign Council by Burhan alone made us angry. It doesn't respect Sudanese aspirations, and we will rally against it tomorrow.
This step is courageous. It's a corrective one. It restored water under the bridge and restored life to normalcy and security.
What Burhan made is a jump in the dark. It will put the country in a dark tunnel. Now it can be called a coup. Making a unilateral step will complicate the scene.
The new Sudanese military administration has received condemnation from the international community. The United Nations has insisted on a return to the transitional government as well as the release of Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok.
We're obviously taking a look at these developments. I would say they're very concerning. We want to see a return to the transition as quickly as possible. We want to see the release from house arrest of Prime Minister Hamdok, as well as all other politicians and leaders that have been detained.
The news of Frederick Willem, or F.W. de Klerk's death has been met with mixed reactions across South Africa. De Klerk died on Thursday at the age of 85 after battling cancer. South Africans differ in memories and views on the deceased elderly former apartheid president. CGTN's Ulisa Jamela has more.
F.W. de Klerk came to power in 1989 under apartheid, a system of legalized racism. Under his government, de Klerk ordered Nelson Mandela's release from prison and unbanned liberation movements. His actions would ultimately lead to a historic election where the late Nelson Mandela became the first democratically elected president and the first black one in the history of the country. De Klerk then shared the Nobel Peace Prize with Mandela for helping to negotiate an end to apartheid. He also served in Mandela's cabinet as one of his deputy presidents. His legacy divides opinions in South Africa. Many black people remain angered by his failure to stop political violence in the bloody years leading up to the 1994 multiracial elections. On the other hand, right-wing white Afrikaners viewed him as a traitor to their cause of white supremacy to retain apartheid. Lukanyo Calata believes that de Klerk's death is denying many people like him the truth. His father is part of the Cradock Four. The Cradock Four were killed by the apartheid government, accused of partaking in the liberation struggle.
We're very saddened by the fact that yet another apartheid criminal has died without ever being held accountable for the crimes that he committed against our humanity. And it's a sad day that de Klerk has died, and he's taken with him secrets about the deals that were made, about the failure to prosecute TRC cases, and the deals that were made that led to people not being held accountable for their crimes.
Political parties have mixed reactions to de Klerk's death.
We'd like to express our deepest condolences to Mr. de Klerk's family, hoping they find solace to the fact that he is finally resting in peace. But at the same time, we are of the view that his passing on closes the chapter in the history of apartheid regime in South Africa.
In those times, it was very uncertain and not many people supported him, and there were people that criticized him badly. The truth is, FW decided to go on, and that he pushed on with a full heart. That, until much later, he changed the political landscape in this country. Mr. FW was not very happy with the handling of politics and the situation South Africa is in now. He also said that the outcomes were not what he was hoping for.
We've lost a champion of democratic principles and constitutionalism who served South Africa long after his retirement from governance. History bestowed on former President de Klerk the unique privilege of taking us across threshold. In announcing the release of Mr. Mandela and other political prisoners and then banning of political parties on the 2nd of February 1999, he opened the way for inclusive democratic negotiation.
Prince Buthelezi served in the government of national unity with then Deputy President de Klerk amongst other leaders as they laid the foundation of South Africa's democracy. While de Klerk in his deathbed issued a video apology for his role in the apartheid government, he died without ever acknowledging that apartheid was a crime against humanity as declared by the United Nations. Yolisa Njomela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The news continues on Africa Live. We will see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. APEC leaders pledge to tackle economic recovery, COVID-19, and climate. And China and Rwanda celebrate 50 years of diplomatic relations. What does the future hold? We'll tell you more. Welcome back to Africa Live. Thank you for staying with us. Now to Beijing, where the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China has wrapped up its 4-day plenary session. Participants reviewed a work report and passed a resolution on the party's experiences and achievements. Let's take a look.
The resolution looks back at key events in the party's 100-year history and answers 2 questions. Why was the party successful in the past? How can it continue to succeed in the future? The resolution notes how China overcame decades of humiliation to achieve economic development. The plenary session reinforced China's people-first approach in its pursuit of socialism with Chinese characteristics. It cited China's stronger institutions and firm foundation for achieving national rejuvenation. The plenary session also recognized the country's recent development in 12 fronts under General Secretary Xi Jinping's leadership. The session said China has achieved a much more balanced, coordinated, and sustainable economic development. The economy is now on a path of higher quality development that is more efficient, equitable, sustainable, and secure. People's lives have been improved in all aspects. Public participation in social governance is growing. Social governance is smarter, more law-based, and more specialized. China has devoted greater efforts than ever before to ecological conservation and made significant progress in building a beautiful China. China also stays firm on key issues. China continues to uphold the policy of one country, 2 systems in promoting national reunification. The country also advanced major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics on all fronts. The concept of a human community with a shared future has become a banner leading trends of the times in human progress. This session also highlights the historical significance of the party's endeavors over the past century in 5 aspects: fundamentally transform the future of the Chinese people, opened up the right path for achieving rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, demonstrated the strong vitality of Marxism, produced a profound influence on the course of world history, made the party a forerunner of the times. Looking to the future, it said that the party must remain modest and prudent, guard against arrogance and rashness, and work hard. This session also listed 4 keys to achieve the goal of the next century: They include maintaining close ties with the people and acting in line with the people-centered philosophy of development so as to better realize, safeguard, and advance the fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of people. It also said that all party members must keep in mind that one thrives in adversity and perishes in laxity. Over the past century, the party has accumulated experience in achieving its goals. The areas include upholding the party's leadership, putting the people first, and advancing theoretical innovation. The session also agreed to convene the next National Party Congress in the second half of 2022.
Moving on to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in New Zealand. Chinese President Xi Jinping had spoken at the ongoing APEC economic leaders meeting online. President Xi underlined opening up in his speech, saying that APEC members should insist on open regionalism. Xi also urged countries to invest more in technology and let the outcome benefit developing economies. Leaders at the meeting have reportedly discussed other issues such as pandemic control and boosting fair distribution of COVID-19 vaccines and medical supplies. The meeting is scheduled to end later tonight, and there is expected to be a declaration on policy priorities against the pandemic. China's President Xi Jinping says the Asia-Pacific region is facing a once-in-a-century test that is crucial to the future of humanity. Addressing an online EPIC ECHO summit, Xi urged members to face today's challenges, such as COVID and climate change, while calling for more cooperation and inclusiveness. Owen Polan reports.
Supporting indigenous populations is a key theme of APEC 2021. And China's president says APEC economies need to be forward-looking and reject practices of discrimination and exclusion.
Attempts to draw ideological lines or form small circles on geopolitical grounds are bound to fail. The Asia-Pacific region cannot and should not relapse into the confrontation and division of the Cold War era.
New Zealand's Prime Minister also believes that the Asia-Pacific region can build back better and emerge from the COVID pandemic stronger and more resilient than ever.
Now, every crisis does present an opportunity, and the 21 APEC economies have been dealt a heavy burden, but also an opportunity to strike an economic reset on a scale we haven't seen since World War II.
Ardern says that APEC has also shown a determination to work together and to reject protectionism.
This year, all APEC economies have worked to make trade easier as we battle the pandemic.
APEC fully supports moves toward a more digital economy, especially when it comes to cross-border customs procedures. But Australia's Prime Minister wants tougher rules to prevent hacking, terrorist activities and cyberbullying on social media platforms.
And we can't have digital platforms providing a shield for people to engage in online abuse, because if we allow that to happen, digital platforms will not be a safe space for consumers, for our children.
But one of the biggest issues at this online summit is climate change.
China will strike a balance between low-carbon transition and ensuring the living needs of its people, and between development and carbon reduction, and will achieve carbon peak and carbon neutrality within the time frame we set.
As the host of APEC 2021, New Zealand also says that governments must send the right signals to businesses and consumers to discourage the inefficient use of fossil fuels.
Why on earth are governments subsidising fossil fuel use to the tune of some $500 billion every year? I'm pleased that APEC is turning the tide on these subsidies by taking concrete steps to tackle them.
And APEC leaders will meet again virtually at their leaders' retreat this weekend. Owen Poland, CGTN, Auckland.
The COP26 summit on climate change has come to an end, with countries pledging to protect the planet. Let's get more from CGTN's Nawi Jarbakale in Glasgow.
Friday was the planned deadline for this COP26 summit, as almost 200 countries look to agree on a way to protect the planet. In a bid to achieve that, an updated draft deal has softened the language around some of the key demands, especially on the use of coal and fossil fuels.
If it doesn't get across the line, it's only going to be because of a lack of political will, political determination and political leadership. And this generation of young people are watching let's not let them down.
Another important issue is who pays for climate change policies. Poorer countries want richer ones to offer them more help, as developed nations have historically contributed more to global emissions. The latest text calls for funding to be ramped up, but doesn't include an annual review of pledges. Many developing countries hope such a clause would put more pressure on donors.
12 years ago, rich countries made the pledge of $100 billion every year by 2020 for developing countries to tackle climate change. It still hasn't been met. This has greatly damaged political mutual trust. The success of COP26 will be hinged on whether the pledges can be met. Rich countries have yet to show their sincerity and commitment to honor their pledges.
Protesters, though, are demanding far more ambition and action. Around the city of Glasgow, a last-ditch effort to make their voices heard. For many climate activists, the international consensus being worked on here won't be enough to limit the impacts of global warming.
I don't think it's enough. I think we wanted more and we needed to see stronger action, but still has some bits that are important, like a call for countries to revise 2030 targets by next year. We think the text now is a floor. It's the absolute floor. We would like to see it improved, but still has some baby steps there.
This updated deal has made some vital concessions. It may be a matter of just a few words, but by giving countries more time to wean off fossil fuels, for example, or calling for a commitment to net zero by 2050, it's essentially hoping to ease any major concerns. In fact, this entire process has been a major balancing act, trying to incorporate different national needs, aspirations, political systems and economies, and getting them to agree on a common cause.
What comes out of Glasgow may be a feat of diplomacy at a time when the world seems fractured, but it may not be enough to meet that crucial 1.5-degree target. Nawid Jabakil, CGTN, Glasgow.
Well, for more on this, let's bring in Tandile Chinyavanu, a climate and energy expert at Greenpeace Africa. She joins us from Johannesburg. Tandile, welcome to the program. Well, first and foremost, does a piecemeal deal signal failure of the discussion?
Good evening, Richard, and thank you so much for having me. I think it definitely does indicate a failure. Anything less than what is required to mitigate that 1.5 degrees Celsius target overshoot is a failure. At this stage in the game, it's too late to be proposing a gradualism. Now is the time for action, and now is the time to implement the necessary measures to move away from fossil fuels and move towards a low carbon economy.
All right. Now, Tandile, I'm trying to wrap my head around why the world is struggling with getting an acceptable deal on climate, yet everyone agrees that something needs to be done urgently. To that, you say what?
Well, it's quite clear that years of anti-climate lobbying by these fossil fuel majors has fooled our world leaders into thinking that they can withstand the heat of climate change, but the opposite is true. So what we want to see is our government prioritizing people, putting people before profit, and allowing for us to move away from fossil fuels. But unfortunately, they seem convinced that an incremental approach to this is the solution, when in fact it is not.
All right, Tandile, I have one more question for you, if you would indulge me. Now, I guess the question that needs to be asked, does the draft capture Africa's agenda?
Well, with the initial draft that was released, the failure there was that there was absolutely no mention of a fossil fuel phase out. And that was one issue that I can speak in terms of for African people was a priority, that our global north countries that have committed to finance follow through with that commitment on the finance that they have pledged with regards to concessional financing, but also follow through with their pledge of reducing their emissions, as the global north countries have a greater share of responsibility in terms of emissions. And that's a commitment that needed to be shown, that they were going to, in addition to asking global south countries such as South Africa to initiate a coal phase-out plan, that they would follow suit as well and also introduce a fossil fuel phase-out plan. But Unfortunately, the wording of the document as it has been released now, while it does include a fossil fuel phase out, is extremely weak and allows a loophole for fossil fuel, for the use of fossil fuels to continue. And this is not a good show of faith from our global North countries. And Africa will definitely be looking to see more commitment from these global North countries towards mitigating climate change.
Tandile, compelling points there. Thank you for sharing your insights and analysis. Much appreciated. China and Rwanda are celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations, and our reporter Wang Hu sat down with Rwanda's ambassador to China to talk about the future of ties.
China and Rwanda established their diplomatic ties in 1971. So what role China has played in supporting Rwanda's economic and social development?
When you look at what China was doing in the 60s, because we talk about the new China in terms of opening up 1978 and all that, but even before those reforms, China was already present on the African continent. And that's why I disagree with the people who talk about China's presence on the African continent because it has economic power, it wants to use its soft, kind of power to rule, to dominate. China has been part of our transformation journey. China has been very supportive of Rwanda, and let me just fast forward from 1994 when now we are recovering from the tragedy. China was among the first respondents. By 2018, which is just 3 years ago, when His Excellency President Xi Jinping visited Rwanda and 15 bilateral cooperation agreements were signed, you see a lot of important sectors: infrastructure, health, education, agriculture, e-commerce, and so on and so forth. So looking at the milestones throughout this journey, you find China as one of the key allies and reliable and genuine partner, because China pursues its foreign policy, in this case with Rwanda, on the basis of mutual respect and mutual benefits. And it supports the national development agenda. China doesn't impose, doesn't come up with a package or prescribe anything for Rwanda and any other country for that matter. So the reason why the contribution of China to Rwanda's transformation journey has been very, very important is because it precisely fits within the national priorities.
You are an experienced diplomat. You were the Rwandan ambassador to Kenya, South Africa, and the United States. And this is your first experience as an ambassador in Asia. So what do you aim to achieve during your time in China? Especially this year marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic ties. What's the hope for the future?
I want to see a lot of Rwandan products being sold in the Chinese market in big volumes. Because for me, that translates into what the farmers get. If you're selling more chili, you're selling more coffee, you're selling more tea, you're actually selling more on behalf of the farmers. That is my biggest target. The second thing that I want to achieve is to make sure that I get more investors from China coming to Rwanda. We have industrial parks. We have so many opportunities in agriculture, in energy, in infrastructure, in real estate, in e-commerce, in health, in tourism, ready. And when I say ready, they are ready for Chinese investors to take the advantage. One other important component is our cooperation and partnership on the global issues, for instance, peacekeeping. As you know, Rwanda is now the third largest troops contributors in terms of global peacekeeping. It's, I think, the second on the African continent. So we want also to, continue working with China, because we're already working with China on the matters of peacekeeping, but we want also, to build on that and do more, because there are so many troubled spots, and China provides logistics, training, and any other support to make sure that we maintain global peace.
Meanwhile, CGTN's Robert Aguila takes a closer look at this friendship that has spanned 5 decades.
On November 12, 1971, China and Rwanda established diplomatic relations. This month, the two countries mark half a century of relations that have seen China become Rwanda's largest trading partner. Diplomatic relations between the two countries were further strengthened with a visit to Rwanda by China's President Xi Jinping in 2018, marking 47 years of diplomatic relations. During that visit, the two leaders signed 15 bilateral agreements. Among the agreements signed were the strengthening of mutual investment in e-commerce, law enforcement and human resource development, visa exemptions and aviation. They also agreed on finance on a $54 million grant for the construction of a 14-kilometer highway connecting the new Bugesera airport. Ahead of that visit, Rwanda's president spoke on the relationship between the two countries.
Between China and Rwanda, but also China and Africa, the quality of that relationship has been getting much better and stronger.
By 2020, trade volume between the two countries stood at $321 million, with cooperation in information and communication technology, mining and agriculture.
Rwanda has creatively utilized export opportunities that exist in the Chinese market to promote its agricultural exports to China. Today, Rwanda's coffee is gaining traction in China thanks to creative use of digital technologies.
In the health sector, China donated 500,000 doses of Sinopharm COVID-19 vaccines. Rwandan students have also benefited from scholarships to study in China. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our business segment with Uche.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Investors in South Africa welcomed the first budget presided over by Finance Minister Gordon Ngwana. And we look at Egypt's e-finance initial public offer that was more than 60 times oversubscribed.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in South Africa. The country's currency, the rand, strengthened early on Friday as we saw investors cautiously welcoming the first budget presided over by Finance Minister Gordon Ngwana. Now, the unit strengthened as much as 1.6% and traded 1.2% higher in Johannesburg. That's after the country's treasury vowed to return state finances to a sustainable path and also hold off expanding welfare measures. Now, according to investing professionals, though, nothing significant has changed, but Gordon Ngwana's hit the right note by emphasizing the need for deficit and debt reduction. Now, of course, Gordon Ngwana has been in the position for just over 3 months, but has pledged to reduce debt and grow the economy. His policy statement has been described as a good attempt to steady the country's finances and also appease investors. Here's Sumitra Naidu reporting.
Critical to the fiscal path we've chosen is the need to be clear and unambiguous on the trade-offs we're willing to make as a nation. We cannot do everything we want at the same time. Equally important is the faster implementation of structural reforms to unlock greater private sector investment, economic growth, and job creation.
South Africa's debt is sitting at $266 billion. Servicing that debt remains the largest spend in the budget at $24 billion. The public service wage bill is another big expense. Two areas that investors are concerned about.
I think what the finance minister is doing at the moment is he's planning for a narrowing of the fiscal deficit while trying to very adequately balance the need for spending to continue.
The minister was frank about the fact that 60% of the budget's non-interest spending goes towards social development.
Today, 27.8 million South Africans are social grant recipients of one or another. This accounts for about 46% of our population. At the same time, the number of people working has declined, further underlining the critical flaws in our economy. Our total spending on the social wage is also very high.
I think we have to be realistic that we cannot afford the social wage bill that we pay, the health, the education, the RDP houses, the free water and lights that many people get. We can't afford that forever and a day. To me, that was an enlightening moment, I think, for the country to realize how much money is already going to people.
The new minister was also firm on structural reforms and also acknowledged the country's electricity crisis.
These reforms should focus on improving competitiveness, productivity, investment, and employment. Our first and immediate task in this regard must be to ensure stable energy supply, reduce the risk of long load shedding, and accelerate the transition to renewable energy sources.
It seems Inagonagwana's first speech was well received. He had the right tone, emphasizing the need for a market-friendly approach to growth and calling for more public-private partnerships. Whether all of this will translate into action remains to be seen.
He's talking a very strong language and bringing the private sector closer to the center of government. If we look at most economies, they are mixed economies, but in our case, the government has not been efficient. If we can bring in better efficiencies that the private sector can bring, there will be benefits to us.
While tax revenues are higher this year, the minister was clear that the commodities windfall could be temporary. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced that the country has secured an $8.5 billion international climate finance deal to accelerate its transition away from coal to renewable energy resources. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with the details.
The funding is a bid to transition from coal towards green energy. It's a partnership between South Africa, the US, the UK, France, Germany and the European Union.
The funds at this stage are allocated to three areas. The first is for the Eskom Just Energy Transition, which we expect to receive the lion's share of this first initial allocation of funds, and as well to support the introduction of electric vehicles into South Africa, as well as a transition to an increasingly hydrogen-based economy.
Following the announcement at the COP26 talks in Glasgow, authorities have moved quickly.
A technical task team has already been established under the leadership of the presidency. The presidency has nominated a senior official to coordinate and lead that technical task team, and negotiations will commence, I am told, very shortly.
Climate change activists are hopeful that the loan will achieve its goal, but there are concerns too.
It's a really positive agreement, but at the same time it is a political agreement. So what remains to be seen is how exactly they'll flesh out that agreement, what the details will look like, how fast we'll be transitioning, what they will fund, and what the conditions of that funding will be.
And then there are the concerns over the position taken by the country's mineral and energy minister on the future of coal-fired power stations.
Minister Gwede Mantashe, just a few days after the agreement, went on a big international platform and talked about how we have to be fighting against the anti-fossil fuel agenda. Given that he is the most powerful minister in charge of our energy, it's a worrying sign that he's pushing back against what is supposed to be progress for South Africa.
While the news has been welcomed, there are questions around Eskom and whether it can fulfill its requirements, considering its history and the overruns in budget and time allocation for Medupi and Kusile power stations. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Egypt now, where an IPO by state-run digital payments infrastructure and fintech platform eFinance was massively oversubscribed. Now, the company offered 24.5% of its shares on the Egyptian Stock Exchange, and it attracted a 700% oversubscription by institutional investors, while retail buyers were oversubscribed 61 times. Here's CGTN's Yasser Kim looking at the IPO and, of course, the impact it had on the stock market.
The Egyptian Stock Exchange has suffered poor performance and reduced volumes since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic in March 2020. However, things have begun looking up since the initial public offer by eFinance in the last week of October. While most companies delayed their IPOs since 2020, fearing market volatility, eFinance's CEO Ibrahim Sarhan chose the opposite direction.
We were afraid like the other companies in the last few months, but we changed our minds completely and took the decision after our roadshow where we met 120 investment funds, corporates and foreign investment banks. We found that they had a big appetite. They confirmed to us that they will join in and buy huge numbers of shares. We discovered we are on solid ground to enter the stock exchange with confidence.
The state-owned fintech company's share price jumped by 79% on its debut, achieving a market cap of $2.1 billion, the largest IPO in the North African country since 2015. The positive impact on the Egyptian Stock Exchange was clear, with private placement a record-breaking 7 times oversubscribed and retail offering oversubscribed 61 times.
True, there was a slowdown in trade, low volumes, low liquidity, and no investor appetite to pump new funding into the market before. But this IPO has strengthened the performance of the market, added new products, therefore attracting new investors, and this could open the door for more diversification in the market.
What was pleasing for officials is that 72% of the allocation came from foreign investors, who had shied away from the market since last year. But what are the future plans for eFinance?
We want to make the best use of the capital raised for the benefit of shareholders, and we are keen to multiply our results so that our shares remain a leader in the market. We have a plan. First, we will focus on growth for the tech companies that are already part of our group. There are 5 subsidiaries and another 2 newly formed companies, eTax and eHealth. Plus, we will expand into other sectors, transportation and tourism.
On the back of the success of the eFinance IPO, the Egyptian government has said that it will go forward with the release of 5 state-owned companies and banks in the Egyptian Stock Exchange in the first half of 2022. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And heading to Ghana now, the country is charting a new path in its automotive industry. It wants to move away from a reliance on car imports to boost car making. Now, Volkswagen is one of the automobile giants that have set up an assembly plant there, as we see the government opening up to investors. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai with more from Accra.
Volkswagen launched its assembly plants in Accra last year. It says it has already trained many locals in the assembling and production of cars.
This transfer of knowledge or transfer of technology has been working well, and you see that we transfer this knowledge to people and they are becoming much more better, and it is also helping us to improve standards in automotive industry.
Vehicles are among the top 3 goods imported in Ghana. The government developed an automotive policy in 2019 to drive growth in its industrial economy and also create jobs for young people.
The automotive market in Africa is small compared to that of China and Europe, but Ghana wants to position the country as a hub for making cars in West Africa.
The government is giving incentives to car makers, including tax waivers. It has also increased import taxes on new and used cars to make people consider buying locally assembled vehicles. Still, the domestic industry says more needs to be done to make it easy for people in Ghana to buy the cars.
good financial support for the customers, like auto loan, as we say. This is very important to have the auto loan. I mean, everywhere you go around the world, 99% of the people, whatever is their standard in the society, use the auto loans to buy their cars, and they don't, hardly anybody go and buy cash. And unfortunately, in Ghana, we're still not so much ready for that.
Ghana is the 5th Volkswagen vehicle assembly location in sub-Saharan Africa, after South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda. As the demand for cars in Africa grows, VW says it wants to tap into the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to create other markets for manufacturing car parts.
We are looking at creating a value chain between the neighboring countries or within the region, because not necessarily that we are producing everywhere. So we will have Ghana having an assembly plant here, also another country producing something like a component for materials required to use for production of the cars or assembly here.
While the coronavirus pandemic has affected VW's target of assembling 5,000 cars locally in Ghana in the first phase this year, it says it is building its capacity to produce up to 20,000 cars annually in the second phase. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Meanwhile, African economists have hailed the keynote speech delivered by Chinese President Xi Jinping at the virtual APEC CEO Summit. Let's listen in to what Trevor Hambai, who is a Zambian economist, has to say.
The positive aspect from that speech is the fact that China is talking about a win-win cooperation. And this is very, very important for all the regions that are affiliated to having to achieve global growth, because it should not be a position where any country should feel that they are losing out in having to have this cooperation. One of the things that you see in terms of the Asia Pacific cooperation is that we have also seen that China has been implementing the Belt Road project for the African continent, which is also speaking to having to support them develop their infrastructure. And this is speaking to development of regional development strategies. And I think this is very, very good. So there is a very good opportunity for the rest of the world to benefit from that industrialization that China has achieved, because we need to be able to firstly cut the cost in terms of how we run businesses in all our countries, and China has achieved that goal.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, we'll be looking at the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow as it presses countries to be more ambitious in their plans to tackle global warming, while of course walking a fine line between the demands of developing and richer nations. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you.
Thank you so much, Uche. Thank you so much. Well, more than 40 Kenyan secondary schools have reported school fires in recent months, and that has led to stakeholders in the educational sector trading blame over the problem even as the crisis persists. CGTN's Nick Mudima has the details.
For all those schools that have been banned, their parents shall build them, full stop.
It has been mayhem in the Kenyan educational sector as schools are reporting fires, and those involved are mainly students, which is leaving many with questions of what has become of the sector.
The problem is not even with the child. The problem is starting with the parents at home. Because a child will not just wake up one day from their dormitory and start burning where they sleep. It's not normal. Something went wrong at home. Because what was this child told before he left for school?
But even as authorities are cracking down on the students allegedly involved in the vice, parents are also on the spot.
As a parent, I would first say that morals begin at home. Actually, when the child leaves home and goes to school, the teacher just tries to engage on what already the parent has done at home. But God forbid, I'm sure there's no parent who would want to tell the child, go and ban a school or go and do something bad in school. But because sometimes we are absent even in their lives when they are growing, that the child lacks guidance.
Education stakeholders, on the other hand, are calling for collective effort to sort out the current issues affecting learning in Kenya.
But we didn't train our teachers and our parents and the children very well on now how to relate. So teachers have taken a back seat and they've left the children now to run the show. So many of the things that are happening in our schools, you may discover that it's teachers now just teaching and going back home. We can't take care of parenting for parents because we are not yayas, we are not maids.
The well-being of the students has been put on the sport and their welfare, interpersonal relationship with the teachers and the school administration.
I think we need to do a little bit of background digging to the pandemic. It was a long holiday. Students were exposed to so much. Remember, now they got a chance to see what happens at home. Most students were involved in business. Remember, school is like a prison, a confinement. But when they were home, there was that freedom of seeing your friends, your peers, people who think like you, people who understand you. And now you're in school, an environment that is normally restricted. And remember, there's been this pressure of schools trying to catch up, governments trying to catch up with the curriculum and allow for students to move to the next levels. Remember, coming from an environment that is very relaxed and going to an environment that is very strict and so many rules has an impact it has on teenagers especially, because they're at the edge of rebellion, they're at the edge of resistance. Not that all of them experience rebellion outwardly, but most of them do. And in turn, that's how they respond, the aggression.
With the tight academic calendar, the situation now falls back to the society, which is keen at addressing the issues at hand.
Many educational stakeholders are blaming COVID-19 to be the main driver of school unrest in Kenya. Right now, the government has given students 2 days rest to shake off pressure and concentrate when they go back to school. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Stay